No, that's fine. Can everybody that's coming in from the waiting room now see your announcement in the chat? Or do we need to repost that? Welcome, everybody. We're letting everybody get logged on and signed in, and then we will get started in a minute. You are here for FPF's hosting of AI Out Loud, so hopefully you're in the right call. And we'll get started shortly.
This is the part where panelists chat amongst themselves and someone reminds us we're all on a hot mic.
Very true. And you're welcome to chat among yourselves. Folks are still streaming on to everybody who's there. We'll get started in just a minute. The numbers climb in pretty quickly, so just want to let everybody get joined up.
Susan, where are you based?
In the Bay Area.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's probably really warm and sunny and pretty today.
Yeah, it is.
All right, looks like it's tapering off here as people join. So welcome everyone to AI Out Loud. Just kind of keeping an eye on it to see if there's still a lot of people coming in, but it looks like it's definitely slowing down. So we will get started. I am Brenda Leong. I am the Senior Counsel and Director of AI and Ethics at the Future of Privacy Forum. We're hosting the event today. Thank you all for joining us. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our website within a few days. Thank you all for coming. Joining me today, we have Ann Toth, the Director on the Alexa Trust team at Amazon, focusing on accessibility, privacy, and deepening customer trust in Alexa-enabled devices. Prior to joining Amazon, Toth was the head of technology policy and partnerships at the World Economic Forum, as well as a member of the founding leadership team at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. She has also worked at Slack, Google, Yahoo, in various roles related to people, privacy, and policy. With us today, we also have Irina Raicu, the Director of the Internet Ethics Program at the Margulis Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. Formerly an attorney in private practice, her work now addresses a wide variety of issues ranging from online privacy to net neutrality, data ethics, and social media's impact on friendship and family, and across the digital divide to the ethics of encryption and the ethics of artificial intelligence and the right to be forgotten. Finally, Susan Gonzalez, the CEO of her own startup, AI and You, brings over 20 years of experience in technology, community outreach, and policy. Susan has spent most of her career in senior policy roles leading community outreach to diverse populations, creating partnerships and educating influencers about technology. She is a former director from Facebook, where she led community engagement, and she also served in leadership roles at Comcast, tech startups, and consumer goods companies. Susan launched AI and You when she realized there was a chasm between the AI ecosystem and communities of color. She created a global bilingual platform of accessible and easy to understand information about AI. Thank you to our speakers for all of you joining us today. Very much appreciate your participation and the expertise you bring to the table for this conversation. We are all aware that artificial intelligence, especially that which is based on machine learning systems, is being used in more products and services around us than ever before. These programs can reflect increased accuracy and expand opportunities, particularly in the area of voice-activated systems and the digital assistants available on mobile devices and in-home products. But there are social and demographic groups that are better represented in the design process, the data sets, and the user context than others. Today, we want to talk about finding ways as voice-based technologies grow to make the AI better reflect who we are and to serve a diverse group of communities' needs equally well. Voice technologies are a quickly expanding user interface to access and use internet-connected systems. Voice systems can include voice activation. These are systems which respond to spoken language to operate. This might also include text to voice and voice to text systems as well. Voice identification and verification. These are systems which use voice as a biometric to identify individual users and allow access, distribute benefits, or otherwise operate in a personalized account platform. And voice analysis, which are systems that review audio recordings for information about the speaker based on data gleaned from the attributes of the voice, regardless of individual identity of the speaker. These might be health related, potentially diagnostic opportunities. This can include emotional state recognition, which we'll talk more about today, as that carries some very particular concerns. And it can include things like age, gender, language fluency, and other cultural indicators. Each of these has the potential to offer many benefits and opportunities for quality of life, accessibility for young or aging or disabled communities, and convenience and interactivity across devices and services. But each also carries specific risks, including privacy concerns, responsible data management frameworks, legal compliance, and equity and fairness values. So for our first general topic today, we want to talk about the inclusivity of the representation, the diversity behind these systems. Voice-based tools are tremendously helpful to some subgroups and may pose particular threats to others. How should we approach this? And Irina, can we start with you for this one?
Well, I think the first thing is to really acknowledge that fact and to not focus so much on the positive use cases and on the improvements in these tools that we forget that they are still very inaccurate for some groups who are trying to use them, and that they still pose the danger of misuse. Some people are just much more vulnerable than others and may not even want voice assistants around them for that reason. So the key, as always with any ethical analysis, is to identify all of the stakeholders, to identify all of the people who will be impacted, and then try to reach out to them directly to understand their wishes and their concerns and the ways in which they might be impacted, rather than assume things, which is how sometimes things are designed.
What are some of the challenges of voice activation in the underrepresented communities? How does it go wrong in that context versus where can it be helpful? Susan, can you?
Yeah, well, I think a good place to start is to acknowledge and understand that no assistant is going to understand every word, right? But what's important to look at, especially for today's conversation, is the error rates, and that it's proving that there's patterns that are being followed within the error rate. So for example, a Stanford study came out noting the African-American error rate was 35% when it was 19% for a white male. That's problematic. And as I was doing more reading specifically about the African-American vernacular, is that some of the tools just do not recognize the language spoken by the community. And it's also important to note that speech recognition is more than just choosing music, right? It's about looking for a job or figuring out how to immigrate to a country or, finding healthcare. That's where we need to look at the pattern to avoid where this can go wrong. But the starting point is having conversations like today, right? And working with people and companies that are open to having these conversations to understand where it can improve. So these conversations are really important to get some results and to identify some solutions.
And
so
Brenda, I wanted to just jump in and say that they definitely add, for people, especially we talked earlier about people who are illiterate, it really enables communication and interaction with all kinds of sources of information and ways to activate networks and to do things that a lot of people around the world just would not be able to do without these voice operated tools. So they can absolutely be amazing in terms of opening doors of opportunity. But again, the discrepancies between how different groups are served are very clear.
Right.
Thank you. 1 second. I see that we already have a question in the chat in the Q&A block. So please continue to add them there. I will keep track and we will try to incorporate those as we go where we can efficiently. And then we will also have a Q&A session at the end where we might combine several that are on similar topics if we haven't addressed them so far. So please do feel free to continue to post your questions there. Sorry. Okay. Anne, did you want to jump in on that?
I was going to build on Irina's point on just the voice forward interface and the benefits that that come from that, whether it's an issue of literacy. It also actually we found that it works very, very well for people with disabilities. And that's one of the other areas of inclusivity that we think about through design, is actually how we make our product usable, not just by sort of one particular demographic, but as flexible as we can be to serve aging populations, which I know you all have focused on here at FPF, people with blindness, deafness, et cetera. So it actually turns out that this isn't just a sort of fun to engage with device. It actually has some real direct utility for many of our customers. So I just wanted to flag that.
No, absolutely. Thank you. To follow up on that point, Anne, what do you since you're the one of us here who's sort of a hands-on in the business of this, what do you see as the biggest challenge in addressing these inclusivity issues?
Well, I think, I not surprisingly, we're here at the Future Privacy Forum. We're going to be talking about data, and the data distribution is not uniform, right? It's one of the challenges. In general, one of our core tenets around privacy within the Alexa organization is to try to do as much as we can with as little data as we need to do it. But when you have a dearth of data in a particular area, that's a situation where more is actually more. And so ideally, we would have an equal distribution of data to work with to be able to train our systems. And I don't think that's the reality today. But I don't think this is a specific company by company issue or an industry issue. I think there's actually a lot of opportunity here for multi-stakeholder engagement and collaboration in this area. And I think the makeup of this panel demonstrates that pretty well. So at Amazon, we have been working on a number of different partnerships with other types of organizations. So we have a 3-year engagement with the National Science Foundation, funding a great deal of research in fairness in AI, which I know Irina knows a lot about. That's one initiative. We have a deep bench of knowledge through our Amazon Scholars program. I actually got to be on a panel last year with 2 professors from the University of Pennsylvania who co-authored a book called The Ethical Algorithm, and that was an NSF event that we did. So those are 2 Amazon scholars that we work with. We have partnerships with the University of Southern California, with Columbia, et cetera. So I think there are a lot of different places where we can engage. But back to the data point, I just wanted to, I've worked in this field for a really long time. And sometimes when we talk about the value of data and the benefits that customers derive from data, sometimes those benefits can seem fairly abstract, or they can feel very downstream. What we've been able to quantify is, Alexa is only 6.5 years old. And in the 6.5 years that this product has been around, we've actually been able to measure a 75% improvement all across our user base for accuracy and performance. When we enter into a new geography or a new language, sometimes it only takes a month. I think when we launched Portuguese, it was about a 7 or 8% improvement within 1 month of launch. And that is accuracy, that is understanding. And so there's definitely data to demonstrate that there is a direct benefit to customers from how we can use that voice data to train our systems. And I think the issue of fixing this problem is probably going to lie in better data.
Yeah, I just want to dovetail on that too. And I think of course, it starts with data, right? And the good thing is that there are more conversations taking place and with companies, like Amazon, right, who are interested in partnering with different types of communities that maybe they haven't partnered with before. And so hopefully what we're hoping is over time that maybe collectively, right, with advocacy organizations and other types of community leaders, maybe we can help address the data issue. So I was having a conversation with an AI software engineer last week who's working on a natural language processing project. And he was explaining that the data they're using, most of it is coming from EU Parliament, because every single transaction in Parliament must be translated. And I thought that was fascinating. And then after I got off the phone, I thought, but wait, what about all, we had this conversation about Spanish, for example, how many dialects are in Spanish alone? I mean, I could recognize, my background is Mexican American, but I could recognize a Cuban Spanish without even seeing the person. So how do we get there, right? How do we improve the data sets to be able to reflect all the communities that could be using these tools later, just really increasing usage overall.
And on that note, I wanted to mention, to flag an announcement that came out, I think 2 days ago, that the Mozilla Foundation has a project called Common Voice, which is open sourcing a list of spoken voice snippets. People are just volunteering their voices. I don't know exactly, what they're saying, whether they're given a script or whether they're just sort of, saying stuff off the top of their heads. But the whole idea is to get a very, very diverse data set. So that will be an interesting project to track. And there are others like that, which will then be available for all researchers and users. But I wanted to make one more point really quick, Brenda, if I can. Talk about, different accuracy rates. It's very abstract. So I want to tell you the story that came to mind when you first invited me to be on this panel was about how quite a few years ago, I was lying in a hospital bed in a hospital hallway outside an elevator. And the attendant who had wheeled me there picked up what looked like a pendant around his neck and said into it, radiography. And the thing said, I heard you say laundry. And then he said, no, radiography. And I don't remember exactly, but the next one I think was cafeteria. And he went through like 5 or 6. And I realized, those kinds of things have gotten far better than they were that many years ago. But I will tell you, I was in no rush to be pushed back into there was no emergency to get back into my room. So I was almost kind of amused. But if the goal of such systems is to increase, efficiency and speed and to get things to move like in a hospital setting, it's very different than, like you said, Susan, picking music or something, right? Then differing accuracy rates can mean real harm, both for the people who may or may not get hired to speak into these tools, or for the people who are being served by them.
I was going to jump in, actually. we're gonna because I think these topics are incredibly interesting, to a point that Susan was making earlier, about learning. We're learning from large populations, or I think it was Irina talking about data snippets and open source data. And I think that's one way we do it, is by populations of people and looking at groups of individuals and how they interact with the service. But there's also an opportunity to customize on a one-to-one basis. And so there are some interesting advancements, some partnerships we've had. We work with an organization called VoiceIt that works specifically with people with disabilities to be able to, so it basically it trains on an individual through a set list of questions and interactions, because people with certain types of disabilities, whether it be Parkinson's or cerebral palsy, it affects their speech. And so this allows the system to learn to that individual, and we work with them to enable a variety of smart home capabilities, among other things. And we also have a feature called Teachable Alexa, where, so just as an example, I have a lot of connected light bulbs in my home. I like the light to be dim in the evening and bright in the morning. So I can simply say, Alexa, put the lights on in night mode, and you'll get a follow-up question that says, what is night mode? And so you basically establish 50% light is night mode. And after that, all I have to do is ask for that. And so there are opportunities to be able to teach Alexa exactly what you mean when you ask a specific question or when you give a specific command. And so I think there's opportunities both on that one-on-one personalization and learning from an individual, as well as learning across groups. So it's going to be a combination of both things. I think they're going to help solve the problem.
Thank you. I'm going to pull one of the questions from the list right now. For the folks asking them, just so you know, I'm going to push the anthropomorphizing and the agency questions to a little bit later, because we're going to have a section where we talk about ethics and context that I think those will fit better. But first up is, how do we provide more privacy for people using voice assistants, especially those for whom this may be their only option, in the sense that they're not just using it out of convenience or choice, but as we've discussed here, that this provides access and opportunity for people who may not have had the ability to use, keyboards or screens or other things as effectively. Are there any differences in terms of sort of the privacy considerations, protections, and measures that are, new or unique or driven by the fact that this is a voice operated system? Obviously, I think we all here would agree that, you know, privacy of personal data is important. So what, is there any aspect of this that's different because it's voice activated that, you know, you at Amazon or either of the other panelists want to point out or highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in on that, and anyone else who wants to jump in, please do. So privacy for us, I mean, by virtue of the fact that this is a speaker and a microphone in your home. I mean, in most cases, that's how people use Echo devices that access Alexa through their Echo device. So privacy was very much top of mind for the development of the product, but also recognition of the fact that it is a voice forward service, right? So there are commands that we have developed so that you could say, Alexa, delete what I just said. Alexa, delete everything I've ever said. Alexa, why did you do that? These are recognizing that we want to bring control to the customer using voice commands in the same way that you would be able to use the product, you know, just in a natural way. So that's one way we do it. The other is by being very transparent. So voice data is what fuels our improvement. It's what makes the product better. We let you see all of your voice or interact with, hear all your voice recordings, see your transcripts, delete them as you would like, set the various retention periods to whatever you prefer. So there are a lot of, and I could go on and on and on and on about the privacy features of Alexa, but in the context of voice, it's trying as much as we can to give you control over the device and over your privacy using your voice.
Susan or Rena, you want to weigh in on that?
I would say, I mean, first of all, I love the delete options. I think those are so important, and those should become standard across industry. But I think what's interesting too is, first of all, I wish there was an option for people to say, you know, I don't want my data to be used to improve the algorithm. Like, I realize that the voice has to be uploaded and analyzed in order to get a response, but I would like, you know, I would like people to have the ability to really limit the use of their data to exactly what the utility is for them. And I think one aspect of this that's really interesting is that you have to educate the users of these tools themselves, because the reality is that since they're, you know, sound or voice activated, they will impact the privacy of everybody else in the room. Mm-hmm. And often people will be in a room and not realize that there is such a device there. So even though the users may want this device and need it, absolutely, they need to be cognizant of what the implications are for other people and let them know, and allow other people to make some choices around that usage as well. One of the most interesting things that I think we don't talk about enough are the kind of negotiations that are happening in homes where one spouse wants one of those things and the other one doesn't, or one roommate wants it and the other one doesn't. Or I've seen, you know, Amazon Echoes deployed now in college dorms or, you know, in hospital rooms. Each of these contexts, you know, invites kind of requires a different kind of ethical analysis and a different analysis of the privacy implications.
No, I agree with you, Irina, and we've really thought through. I mean, one of the things, you know, as you know, we've spent a lot of time trying to educate people about wake word and invocation, and, you know, and the fact that these devices, there's a misperception, a very common misperception of the always listening device, and it doesn't quite work that way, right? You have to invoke the service either through one of 3 specific wake words, and Alexa is the most common one, but you can say computer, you can say Amazon, and it's only then that you get the ring light, you get a visual or an auditory cue that lets you know that we're now waiting for your utterance, for your query. So there are some very specific design elements that went into trying to make it as obvious as possible. And in fact, you know, designing for privacy effectively means adding a little bit of friction into this service, right? I mean, in a purposeful way. And that's all part of building trust with customers, getting people comfortable with that experience. Because, I mean, while we are, as you point out, like this is a device that sits in many people's homes, but many of us are also carrying these around with us, right? And invoking voice assistants in our cars and on our phones. And so, you know, thinking about how you layer privacy into the design of the product while you're building these in a way that adds value, but doesn't completely distract from the experience. If that's the balance, I think we're all trying to achieve.
I want to, we have a couple more questions that are related specifically to privacy. So I want to take a couple more minutes right now to keep talking about this, but try to make sure that we address this. One of them, I think, Irina, is related to what you were saying about disagreements, even among the people living in the house, as to what devices to have or how they should be used or incorporated, things like that. One of the questions has to do, which is obviously not really a technological question for the manufacturer, but more of sort of a social or normative question. What do you do as the, or what are your thoughts, any of you, on the, awareness and disclosure of, going to someone's house and finding out that you don't want a digital assistant in your home, but they have a digital assistant in their home, and maybe you don't realize it. And as Anne points out, that doesn't mean it's recording everything that you're saying while you're at the house, but just the fact that it's there, and maybe somebody else in another room triggers it because they're adding to their shopping list and you're talking in the background and things like that. What are some of your thoughts about like how that, can responsibly be handled, either through awareness and training, through whatever the appropriate means might be?
Well, my first thought was I haven't been in someone's home for a really long time.
Well, there's that. Maybe we'd be willing to be recorded just for the privilege of going to somebody's house for a while. Fair.
Right. But I do want to, but before the privacy experts talk more about privacy, I do want to address the education component of this, right? So the goal of our work at AINU is just this, is to move your customers and your users from, fear to trust, because the starting point right now is fear simply because of the unknown. And so I think that really is a critical piece to not only, improve everybody's experience, but just improve the product overall. It's just improve trust.
So it's interesting. I would argue that most people start with trust and maybe need to develop some healthy fear. I mean, it depends where you're coming from. I think to answer the question specifically, I used to joke that we now need to have doormats that say, by entering this house, you are consenting to having your image and voice, uploaded, analyzed, whatever. But short of that, because we talk about like giving people notice, right? And that would be how you would at least give people notice. But we don't do any of that right now. And I would add another context. We have voice activated toys. So imagine your child going on a play date to another child's house and playing with, what used to be for a while, I don't think it's available anymore, but Hello Barbie used to be a voice activated toy. And all of the conversations from Hello Barbie would be uploaded to the cloud and then downloaded, if the parents wanted, to the parent's phone via an app. So your child could be going to somebody else's house, having a conversation with their friend and a toy, and then the other parent, even though who wasn't in the room, so the children are not aware of their voices, and their conversations going to another parent. I think these are real challenges, and that people really need to understand all of the implications of voice activated systems.
Right.
Yeah, let me add one more thing here. I just want to take one more minute on the privacy, because we're the Future Privacy Forum. It's important to us, and it's important to all of you, and clearly to our participants today. And then we'll move on to the next section. But and again, I think this is probably going to need to start with you. But obviously, you've already discussed how the data is necessary to make the product work better, and add reliability and accountability for that. What about other uses of the data? So we have a question about, how can I want to use a system like this, but sort of screen myself from my data being used for advertising back to me? So certainly Amazon has a lot of information on me. I'm not picking on Amazon, but you're here, and I shop at Amazon a lot. So if you have a lot of my shopping history and other data on me, does that voice data get incorporated into that in any way in my personal profile, or are there protections or choices I can make settings controls on or something to limit that data being used in that way?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have the option to delete all your voice data or to not have any of it retained in the first place. Is all available to customers. But the thing that also I think people need to think about is Alexa is effectively an entry point into a number of different services. You might be engaging with Amazon Music or Spotify or shopping or news. And every time you do that, it's not exactly just Alexa data, right? It is sort of going into because you're activating a shopping purchase in many cases, or a listening history or a viewing history. So those things are going to reside at the service or with the third-party skill in some cases that you're using. So the data it isn't simply a silo of Alexa data. It is an entry point, not all that different from thinking about how you would use any other sort of hardware device as an entry into other software products that you may use. So I think it's more distributed than thinking of it as simply voice data in that regard. But as much as possible, I think we're leaning into the transparency and the control aspects of this to make it really clear what we do know about you. Because one of the things I think that is really frustrating in the world we're in right now is that data is being shed sort of all the time by people and ubiquitously collected by a lot of different entities, whether it be through, and I actually used to have, I don't know if it was a Tumblr or an Instagram account. I actually think I've let it go dormant, but I used to take pictures of all the signs everywhere that said you're on camera here, or whether it was in the taxi cab or on the street corner. And it got to be a pretty full list of like passive notices that you were being watched. I think, and that's where there's a lot of knowledge asymmetry, where there are individuals in the world who don't know what organizations have about them or where it lives. So at a minimum, just being really open and transparent about that is, I think, a starting point to giving people back more control by simply knowing what that organization knows about me.
Thank you so much. So I want to move to the sort of our second main focus area, which is on some specific use cases for voice activated systems and some of the opportunities that they offer. We've already alluded to that in several places this morning. Susan, to start with you, you made the comment earlier about, dialects, different variations of a particular language. And then of course, we also know that there's many, many different languages, many of which around the world are spoken by very small communities of people, as opposed to the 100 or so languages that are spoken by millions of people. What are some of the opportunities that the technology offers for empowering some of those minorities or people, communities, neighborhoods using different aspects of language, even if it's in a standard language like English or Spanish, as well as those low resource languages?
Yeah, well, let's just start with low resource languages. I think that in and of itself, just the term and how it's defined is just kind of interesting, right? In the broader context. But essentially, my take is we just haven't gathered the data, so we just don't have the resources. But what's promising there is kind of the end of the sentence is yet, right? And I think that's the promise. And then. But when you talk about like where this works, I think particularly, in India, for example, where women, they're not really educated. They're not allowed to be educated, but a voice activated system gives them an entire life that they may not otherwise have had. And I think though that there are so many, of course, we could all name so many things where this has not gone well, but again, we're heading in the right direction. And I think an opportunity too is particularly with English as a second language. English as second language speakers has exceeded native English speakers worldwide. So like that's a place to start, right? So it's certainly not just a US thing. It's a global challenge, but also an opportunity. And I think hopefully, maybe in a year from now we meet again and we have a long laundry list of where it's working well outside of the disabled community. And even then that's challenging because there sometimes are speech impediments. So I think we're heading in the right direction to look for solutions. So we have many, many more positive stories to tell. And I would imagine Anne has some great stories.
Well, we're doing a lot of research in all of those areas. I would say there's a lot of research, and there are, the United States is a very large country, but there is not one speech pattern that is monolithic. There are regional variations in dialect and accent, and we're working to try to tune for those. And in fact, actually, I think we do have actually a multilingual mode on Alexa. 76% of people who access Spanish language in the United States access it through multilingual mode, and that works really well with multi-generational households as well, where you have people of different generations speaking different languages. There's actually even a feature that that is actually, it is very Star Trek-like, which is the ability to translate from one language to the other using Alexa. So there are, there's lots happening in that area.
So this was a use case or an example about, you know, literally voice as the place where a voice system can be helpful. At the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, where voice is just the interface, but it's a situation we already deal with, which is healthcare. And a couple people have made reference to this already in ways that it could be used. Irina, you told the story of the hallway experience or being taken to the right place. What are some of the other concerns raised by the use of voice in these cases? And especially, as I mentioned in the opening, as we may start to try to use voice as a diagnostic or as a informative set of data beyond just the context of the speech or language, but actually analyzing what else that might be telling us about the person involved. Irina, can you take that one?
Yeah. So I think the diagnostic question is probably my main concern right now. But to go back for a second to the notion that we're heading in the right direction, and I absolutely agree that we are. I think that also begs the question of, given that we're not there yet, what are some contexts in which the tools should not be deployed right now, knowing the lack of accuracy we have for particular groups, right? So in addition to that, the idea of diagnostic, the idea itself is wonderful. And I think, again, that we will probably get to better accuracy. But right now, we know that from various efforts that have been made to try to identify, for example, just from the way people speak, whether they're developing or have Alzheimer's or dementia or some other problems, invariably, we find that the models were trained on, again, incomplete, non-representative data. So I'm very, very concerned about the likelihood of misdiagnosis people. And I wonder to what extent such systems might be deployed, again, too soon when we know that they're not accurate and they still get deployed. And in a way in which people don't even know that, for example, they're being diagnosed and maybe kept from doing certain things by virtue of a wrong diagnosis made without their awareness. We know that there are so many differences, not just among dialects, but among, your voice changes as you get older. Different cultures speak differently. I think sometimes, the researchers from one country will just think that everybody sounds like them. And I remember thinking that it's very appropriate that I be invited to talk about AI out loud because I tend to be loud. And in some cultures, if you are speaking loudly, it means that you're angry or you're somehow revved up. And in other cultures, that's just how people talk, right? So at what point do we get to that really nuanced understanding? I mean, Anne, I think, would say, well, if it knows you, it will know that when you talk that way, you're just being yourself, right? But I think we're not there yet. So we have to be very careful in terms of, not stifling the research and, building the data sets that will allow for better products, but not deploying them too soon while we're heading in the right direction, we might be causing real harm to people right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to throw in, I'm sorry, I just want to keep us moving because we have a lot more to cover. But I do want to throw in a use case question from our participants that I think you might be interested in addressing, which is the content of the answer. So Alexa can tell me the weather or a recipe or what I last bought that I want to buy another one of or something like that. But in terms of sort of general informative answers and information, I know that there's it's much harder to sort of figure out what they're going to answer. A Home Assistant is going to answer for that. And there's a question about, that still seems to be very fuzzy. How do you address that? The content parts of, Alexa, is there a God? Things that are up on that scale of things. How do you deal with that?
Well, this ties together with the comment I was about to make on Irina's remarks. And so where to even begin? One of the things I really hope to do is to be able to educate people more about how the technology works. So it's actually multi-part. So I say something, I ask Alexa a question, we call that an utterance. That is a recording of speech that we make, and then we transcribe it into text, right? That's the first step, is the speech recognition to text. And then it is taking that and running it through our natural language understanding engine, which tries to derive meaning from the text to actually understand what you meant by what you said. When we know what you mean, or we think we know what you mean, then we go to seek an answer that is relevant, timely, and accurate to return that back to you. And then it goes through this process back, and then Alexa says it to you. And so that all happens in milliseconds. And I still think it's miraculous, because I'm sure there's a portion of the world that believes that it's sort of like Little House on the Prairie, where you call up on the phone and the operator's listening, and and it doesn't work that way. It's very sophisticated, and it's kind of amazing that I can order Tide Pods as easily as I do. So I think that's kind of cool. So I just want to be clear about how that works. But there is a whole team that works within the Alexa Trust organization called the Sensitive Content Intelligence Team, because one of the things we want to do is make sure that our result is not just accurate, but is appropriate. And so we recognize that we have a device that is, in many cases, a household device, and a service that operates through that device. And so we try to be not just timely and accurate, but appropriate. And this was particularly true during the 2020 election cycle, when people were asking about COVID information, when people were asking about do Black Lives Matter. This is an area where we understand that the technology for meaning, particular in the health context, we might not be 100%. So we don't want to we want to be very careful about what health information you get from the device, because one of the other interesting dimensions about this that differentiates the Alexa experience from other types of devices you may use is that the answer or what you get is delivered to you in a voice that sounds like Alexa. So there are very significant brand considerations to making sure that we are, as much as possible, accurate and appropriate when we interact with household members.
Just as a quick follow-on to that from the participants, there's a question about sort of expert knowledge specific options here. Is there any, does it already exist, or is there any potential thought to the idea that there would be sort of like a doctor's version of Alexa, or something that would, you'd sort of have it channel specifically to like more high-tech science-based kinds of answers if it's being incorporated into that sort of professional environment, versus what I might need, where you might just feed me a WebMD answer or a Wikipedia answer or something like that, but where it would actually tie to some other specific knowledge source for people in that context?
Yeah, so we have one of the features of Alexa that's very cool is that we have, in the hundreds of thousands of different skills that are available that you can effectively, they operate like apps, you can enable them. And some of them are in the health domain. So there are HIPAA certified apps that you can use that have been through that process. And I think more and more, you're going to see those kinds of experiences. I don't think there are that many, because we have a very high bar for what we allow there today. But to the extent that we would offer that information to you, I think my preference would be that it would come to you from a trusted brand that has gone through with some kind of third-party certification before we make that available to customers. So I think the answer to that is yes, you will see more of that.
So can I just add here, Brenda, one thing we're talking about, and Anne was talking about the development, and I know firsthand, in tech, a lot of it is, ship product, get it out. And I think that's proven to be a problem, right? Particularly when it impacts underrepresented communities. And so what I would just like to just offer just overall, not just to the Amazon teams, is to ask yourselves, look around the room, and are there different perspectives at the table at that stage, rather than shipping a product and having, to unfortunately pull it back. And we can't wait until there's more diversity per se, in STEM, but what are the perspectives that may be helpful to the team on the front end? I think overall, not just for these products, but for all products.
And even for products that have already been deployed, are there easy channels for people to provide feedback, right? Because it's likely to happen that any product that you put into the world will be misused in some way, or will fail in some ways. And I think one of the problems is that people who find that it's not working for them sometimes really struggle to sort of get that message back, when that message could be really useful to developing a better product.
So that's a great segue into our last section here, where we want to talk about the ethics and design and things like that for these systems. And Irina, I know you've written on this in the past, and we've already talked about it a little bit today, both in accuracy and, you know, practicality, but now also ethically. When, in your perspective, or what is a way to measure when a voice recognition or a voice analysis tool is ready to deploy in that bigger picture of like ethically, we think this is the right thing to do to ship the product, as Susan says, that we're ready to do that?
Yeah, so I think the ethics of deployment is one area that we're definitely not talking about enough. And things get shipped on the theory that, again, you know, over time, by being used by a lot more people, they will get better. But in the meantime, they might fail. And I think, again, the analysis, I think, has to be contextual, because it's okay in some contexts whether, you know, voice analysis or voice activation fails, and in others it's really not. So that's part of the question.
And then Susan, do you have some thoughts on what are some of the like practical tools or guidance or principles that companies can use to make that decision to either create, design, employ, deploy voice activated systems?
Well, I think it's about transparency, right? When a company reports out accuracy rates, what are those accuracy rates reflecting? You know, are they really reflecting, for example, women, you know, or different dialects of underrepresented communities? I think that's a starting point, and from there, then collectively, I mean, it's kind of it takes a village situation, right? Where it's the company that's creating the product for sure, but it's also time now to consider, how do we bring in, you know, civil society? How do we bring in academia in a different way? Again, because we need different perspectives, we can't wait until the technology teams are diverse themselves. That's a long road. People are working on it, but that's a long road. But in the interim, there are different ways that we can address some of these things on the front end. And I think, again, partnerships such as this and like conversations like this are heading in the right direction. So that's the good news.
So to build, sorry, I just regained two of my thoughts that I missed before, and to build on what Susan was saying, I think we need sort of the opposite of what we have now. Instead of the hype of deployment that talks about how great this works, I would love to have clear disclosures of the limits of any product as it's put into the world, including maybe we know that it works, you know, that it has this kind of discrepancy between accuracy for these types of voices. I think knowing that ahead of time doesn't make the product less useful. It just makes it clear what it is that you're getting. And the other thing in terms of deployment is that systems that could cause great harm should not be deployed from the get-go at scale. There should be small scale deployment that really tests the products in the real world before they're deployed, you know, and right now we have some of these systems deployed, you know, by states, and then finding out a few years later that maybe they were not working as, you know, we had been told they did. That really needs to stop.
So, and the sort of last question in this section is, and we've referred to this again already today a few times, is the concept of trust. What are the ways in which you can increase consumer trust? And before you answer, I just want to throw in a couple of specific sort of examples. You don't have to address each of these, but I feel like these each relate to the concept of trust as people are asking about specific products. So, you know, robots that are designed to be for children, you know, how are the privacy and security concerns designed into that with that market in mind? And sorry, there was one other one here that was a specific security in terms of, you know, access to those devices, people hacking a voice activated system or calling in through the window and telling it to unlock the doors and things like that. So with all these things in mind as potential specific context, how do you sort of, given your title, how do you sort of address the concept of trust broadly and set your priorities for how to keep consumers' needs in mind for that?
Right. So the Alexa Trust organization is in the product organization. We're not a tack on. We work with the product teams as features are being proposed and developed in the very early stages of development on the hardware side and on the software side. So the team that I sit with reviews privacy, as privacy is really foundational. And it is, I mean, we understand that it is a gating factor for people purchasing an Echo device, right? They are concerned about privacy. We do a lot of customer research around this. So it was important to be proactive in addressing it. So this organization has privacy within it. We think about the use cases for accessibility and making the product as useful for as many customers as possible for aging communities and disabled communities. So there's an Alexa for Everyone group within the Alexa Trust organization that's thinking about that. And I'll add that, you know, one of the benefits of accessible design is that it doesn't just help the small percentage of customers who may have a specific disability. It actually has a ripple effect, because if you think about all of the people in the households that care about these individuals, it positively impacts their lives as well. So it has this real sort of force multiplier effect, I think, which is important. And so those are just a couple of areas that we focus on within that group. We have a program called Privacy Bar Raisers, which is actually a group of individuals that actually evaluate each feature with a privacy lens. And it is a gating factor for launch, that you actually have to get through this evaluation for privacy, much as you would a security review prior to launch. So these are things that we have implemented in our product development process. There are a lot of features that we have added very specifically to the product to help really be clear about that data collection piece. I'm actually also really pleased to tell you there's a whole Amazon Kids team that works on this. I know there were some questions about COPPA compliance, and yes, we do that. And there are some, as you know, there are very specific Echo devices that are marketed and sold to children, and there are additional protections that are put onto those devices. There are Kindle devices, for example, Fire tablets, et cetera, that are all carefully evaluated with a safety lens in mind, and thinking about the nature of the content, but also thinking about the data and how we treat data that we get from customers that we know are children. So there are a lot of layers involved in evaluating these products and services and thinking through the implications of what it means, because there's what it boils down to for me is that working on a product that people have put in their homes, that is an incredibly high bar. That is an honor to be. I mean, they are trusting us, as Irina mentioned. They trust us when they make that purchase, and it is up to us to be worthy of that every single day. And it only takes one interaction or one negative surprise to have someone unplug that device and not use it again. So we're trying to avoid that by being proactive and hopefully being as customer centric as we can and addressing these things proactively.
Well, I just want to dovetail on that just briefly, Brenda, too, is that hopefully over time, I mean, Amazon, you're definitely, sounds like you're quite creative. And it's also, again, I think we're at a place in the development of AI is like, so is there someone, and I mean this rhetorically, is there someone specifically focused on inclusivity, right? That like someone's, I don't mean just at Amazon, but I mean, is that someone's role in each company, right? Because that's a lens that we really need to have at the table too.
Yeah, there is, and that's the good news. And they're nested within a number of our different organizations, but there is a person within the Alexa org that I work with and have worked with on some of these things. And when we think about, for example, if you ask Alexa, do all lives matter? Do Black lives matter? I mean, that's something that did go viral, and that was something that we actually worked with a number, not just across the leadership, but involving other stakeholders throughout the organization. We have a number of employee resource groups, and of course, we have a very active employee base who uses these products and they're not shy about giving feedback on how to improve the product experience. So we take all of that into consideration when we are thinking about these things.
And
So I
I
want to
remember, sorry, I was just going to say, I remember that a few years ago, there were concerns about children being rude to Alexa and to other voice activated devices. And I believe that somebody came up with a sort of a politeness tool for Alexa. I forget what they're not called tools. What are they called?
I've heard of a polite mode before that is specific to child directed devices. I'm
thinking we now need that applied at all levels, not just to children, but.
So we've only got a couple minutes left, and that actually ties in really well to one of the questions that I want to get to here. We didn't talk a lot about this in advance, but I think it's a really, sort of obvious question, deserves at least a couple minutes here, which is the whole general idea of anthropomorphizing assistants, machines, products, whatever it might be. One of the senior fellows at FPF and I wrote a paper a couple of years ago on dishonest anthropomorphization, which is, sort of creating a robot or a device of some kind that intentionally misleads the user in a way that's not clear and wouldn't be expected based on our normal interactions with entities, with people, with animals, with the way things we're used to them reacting, and now we have machines that may or may not be programmed to react in those expected ways and without really notifying us. So I would love to hear your thoughts, Irina. I think that maybe do you want to kick that off on terms of like what the either the ethical issues or what some of the contextual issues are about everything from choosing, gender for the voice or names or other features and things. And Alexa is not really a robot in the sense that it doesn't have independent movement, but other devices and items that are going to be voice activated in our lives that will. What are your thoughts about that?
I think assigning these tools, gender and looks and all of these other things that we're describing, it goes against, something that we haven't talked about, but you had mentioned at the beginning of the hour, which is autonomy, user autonomy, how much the user really understands what he and she is interacting with. And I remember reading a fascinating article about the elderly. And how they really value all kinds of robotic tools. And I think that includes, voice interaction type tools that would allow them to remain as independent as possible, right? But that they wanted to see them the way they see a walking stick or a walker or some other device, that they don't, that don't try to portray themselves as being a dog or a human assistant or something, right? They are tools that allow them to continue to be independent. So I think, I think there's potentially a shifting away from this notion that we want these anthropomorphized, robots, aside from the context of children, which again, I think can be, useful or really problematic depending on how the children interact with them, but that we can get all the benefits without potentially sort of tricking people into thinking that they're interacting with something very different than what's in front of them.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Anne? Or?
I guess I'll add a couple points. So there's a lot around ethical AI that really focuses on human-machine interaction, and AI is AI and it's not a human, and we should be very clear about that. And we try to be. I know a lot. I think there was even a question about the device and the service name. A lot of people are not. The whole issue of Alexa. When I got to Amazon, I actually learned that the history of the name was actually derived from the Library of Alexandria, meant to be sort of the sum total of human knowledge at the time, which I didn't know. So that was where the name came from. But I think that that aside, we are conscious of this issue, and I personally, when I refer to the service, I actually don't refer to Alexa as a she. I refer to Alexa as they, them, because I don't like it for whatever reason. It feels a little colder to me than it should. So I stick with they, them, but that's a choice that I make as part of my interaction with this service. And ideally, we would reach a level where everyone can personalize the service in a way that allows them to modify any of the things that they don't particularly care for, and defer to a setting that they prefer. That would be my goal there.
So we're just about at time. Actually, we are at time. I want to do like a speed round, 25 words or less. Final thoughts. Susan, can you start?
Yeah, I just think this topic and many others within AI, it really is about creating social equity, in the AI ecosystem. And so these conversations are super important. And I think equally as important is to be educating the communities that can be most negatively impacted. So I appreciate everybody, coming together for this, because these are the kinds of things that will start to create change.
Okay, Irina?
I agree. I would say that we need to listen very much to the communities that are impacted, and we probably need to have a conversation like this every year, because the ground is shifting under our feet all the time, and the education process doesn't stop. There are new waves of people being impacted by these devices. We need to hear this again and again.
And Anne?
So I like to think of myself as a cynical optimist. I'm generally a hardened cynic in most things, but when it comes to technology, and I think particularly with inclusion technology, I feel like there's a lot to be optimistic about. And I think I also just want to say that, I come here as like, I'm like the face of Alexa for this conversation, right? And I come here not with hubris, like we haven't solved all the problems at all. I mean, that would be ridiculous to state, but we come here with a lot of humility to engage in this conversation so that we can do better, because it's our goal to be equally highly performant for all of our customers. And until we get there, we won't rest.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for everyone who attended and participated today. Thank you for all the great questions in the chat there. I'd like to again thank all of our speakers for joining us. Please follow up with any additional thoughts you may have. If I didn't get to your question, it's not because I didn't think it was important, and I'm happy to engage with anybody on this topic separately if you want to email them to me. And this is work that FPF intends to continue on into the future, and I'm sure with these partners as part of that conversation moving forward. We'll tag it down for every year, Irina. We'll get back together and replay and take it from there. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.